My name is Mike Pothier. I'm the Program Manager for the Catholic Parliamentary Liaison Office. I'm sitting in Cape Town, just over the road from Parliament. I know that there are a number of people with us this morning who are perhaps not that familiar with what we call CPLO, the Catholic Parliamentary Liaison Office. So I'm going to start by just saying a few words very briefly about our organization. It is a unit, a department, a desk, whatever you want to call it, of the Southern African Catholic Bishops' Conference. And since 1997, we have been tasked with liaising with Parliament and with government on matters of legislation and policy. We make submissions, we engage with government departments, etc. Doing advocacy for the common good. We follow the tenets of what's called Catholic social teaching, where I guess the bottom line is we're trying to improve society, make it a better place. And one of the ways that we try to do that is through this sort of an event where we bring together people from the world of policy, NGOs, community groups, etc., to discuss important topics. There's so many important topics. This one certainly is right up there as a crucial one in our country. Just yesterday evening in Cape Town, we heard a news report of a 15-year-old boy who'd been taken into custody in Bonteheuwel on allegations that he had been raping young girls, 12-year-olds, over a period of the last 2 years. And this is not, sadly, anything particularly unusual, as I'm sure our guest is going to tell us. So it's something that we really have to get to grips with. It's not, of course, the easiest subject to talk about, but it's something that needs to be tackled. And I think the level of interest in this event, we now have 60 people, illustrates how pervasive this problem is in our country and how seriously it needs to be taken. I'm going to just also introduce then our guest. I've been given a short bio, which I'm going to share with you. I'm sure a lot of you know Dr. Rademeyer probably much better than I do. But Dr. Marita Rademeyer is the chairperson and co-founder of the Jellybeanz organization, which is about helping children who have experienced abuse and neglect. They provide individual and group therapy to children who have suffered abuse and trauma. They create therapeutic tools and treatment programs, and they provide training to professionals who work with child protection and mental health. Marita herself is a clinical psychologist who's been working in this field for the past 30 years. She has a special interest in managing inappropriate sexual behaviors in children, as well as advocating on the harmful effects of pornography on children. She's helped children and their caregivers deal with the effects of child abuse and neglect, rape, violence, crime, HIV/AIDS, cancer, youth awaiting trial, and clients with physical and mental disabilities. She's co-authored a number of books, Voices of Hope, Healing Stories for Africa's Children, Rainbows of Hope, Other Healing Stories for Africa's Children, Protecting Children and Help Them Heal, as well as Our Bodies, helping parents and teachers talk to young children about sexuality. And then finally, Psychological First Aid for Children, Adolescents and Families, a guidebook for first responders. I'm sure all of these are available through Google one way or the other and through our local book distribution sites. So unusual for us to have one speaker at an event like this, but it allows us perhaps to get a little bit more deeply into the topic with one person who is an acknowledged expert in the area. And let me also say that, as I've put in the chat box, Marita has asked that you feel free to post your questions and comments in the Q&A at any point during her presentation. It's not necessary to wait until the end. She, in fact, prefers to deal with these points, comments, and so on as they come up. So that's also a slightly different format. Good. We are recording this event, and the recording will be available shortly afterwards for those of you who are very keen to have a sort of raw recording. But we will also then edit it into a packaged video, which will remove all the ums and the ahs and the little breaks and things that happen. And that takes a little while, but that will be available within hopefully 10 days or so. It is Easter holidays coming up, so the people who do this for us may be a little bit delayed. And it'll be available on our website in due course. And of course, anybody who has registered for this, you just have to send an email to info@cplo.org.za and request a link, and we'll make sure that you get it. Our project coordinator for this project, our project on women, children, and the family, Lois Law, who has put this whole thing together, is unfortunately struggling with her internet connection this morning and hasn't joined us yet. So some of you will be expecting to see Lois. Hopefully she'll be able to join up a little bit later. But she'll make sure that you are kept informed about the progress of this topic and the availability of the recording and so on. The last thing that I need to do before I hand over to Marita is just to ask you to join me for a short silence. We always do this at the beginning of our meetings as a faith-based organization. We invite you, if you are so inclined, to join us in a silent prayer for the success of the meeting, for the inspiration of the Holy Spirit in what we are doing. And we recognize in particular today that both the Christian and the Muslim faith are in the middle of the holiest time of the year. So that adds, I think, another layer to what we are doing today. So a short silence. Thank you. Good, thank you very much. So we're now up to 85 people. People are flocking in, which is wonderful. Marita, I'm going to hand over to you. I see we already have one point in the Q&A. That's just telling us that the chat function is disabled. We'll have a look at that, but you're welcome to use the Q&A if the chat is not working. Marita, over to you.
Mike, thank you so much for your kind introduction. I would just like to apologize to everybody who's tuned in today. I sent the wrong photograph of myself for the email invitation. That photograph is 10 years old. So, so some of our viewers must be thinking, oh, the poor woman has aged terribly since the email was sent out. So thank you so much for the invitation. On two levels, really. The first level is that I have a captive audience to speak about something that I feel really passionate about. And the second reason is that we're very excited to be building our relationship with the Catholic Church, because we've been doing some work for you over the past 2 years. We did a presentation on pornography for all of the headmasters at the Headmasters Conference, and we also made a video which was produced by Brescia House on the use of pornography, which was made available to all parents of children who attend the Catholic schools. So this is really an opportunity for us to strengthen our working relationship with you, which we really am very excited about. Mike, I did prepare a PowerPoint presentation for today, and I'm really hoping that I can share that, if that would be possible. Otherwise, I can email it to you, and then perhaps you can do the clicking.
You can. You should be able to share if you have a share screen button at the bottom of your screen there.
Share screen button, I can see it.
Okay. I'm going to make you a co-host, and then it should pop up.
Great. I would also be grateful if you could co-host my colleagues Chairperson and Sue, because they're going to help me to have a look at the Q&A and then bring the questions to my attention so that I can focus on the presentation.
Is that Sue Klingenberg?
Yes, Sue Klingenberg and Chairperson de Klerk. We've got a whole support crew here. My colleagues know that whenever it comes to anything technological, I need my hand to be held the whole time. All right, Mark, are you now seeing my presentation in front of you?
Yes.
All right. But you're not, my colleagues are going to help me to figure it out so that you can also see my face.
We can see your face?
You can see my, oh, all right. So I'm just then going to continue. The first thing I want to really do is put out a very clear disclaimer. I was born in the 1960s. My dad traveled to work on a bus. We did have a motor vehicle, which we took out on Sundays to go to church and to visit the family. When I finished at university, the internet had not yet entered South Africa. We did not have microwaves when we grew up. We did not have, as a matter of fact, for a while, we didn't have a landline in our house. So I was really born before technology. And what I'm sharing with you today, with everything surrounding pornography, is what my clients and my colleagues have taught me. This is really not knowledge that comes from books, but from my direct experience in working with children. And I'm sure that there are going to be many clever people who want to ask me technical questions about internet and computers. I'm afraid I'm going to have to ask my colleagues to help you there. Yes, I've got one of my lovely young colleagues who did her master's degree on effective social media on young people, Chairperson de Klerk, who I'm going to ask to help me if I get stuck. All right, just to kick off today's presentation, I'm referring you to a study beautifully designed, carried out in South Africa before COVID, BC, which showed that more than 1/3 of children in South Africa will have had experienced some form of sexual abuse before the age of 17. So that's 1 in 3 children, some kind of sexual abuse. And I'm going to unpack what that means in a minute. But this is really, and I'm sure you are as horrified as I am. And the scary thing is that almost half of sexual abuse of children will be perpetrated by another child under the age of 18. And that's what we call harmful sexual behavior. We don't speak about children as perpetrators or as sexual offenders, because children who commit these acts have been put in a position where, for some reason, this has become normalized for them. So if a child is an actor in sexual abuse of another child, we call that harmful sexual behavior. And I'm going to be unpacking that in more detail as we go along. All right, a little bit of technical information that I just want to put across is that many of us are very aware of contact sexual abuse. An example of that would be a rape of Mark. I apologize to you and to our participants. I want to just go back one step and say, in South Africa, the sexual abuse of boys exceeds that of girls. And that is a very important point for us to make, because we often spend so much of our time protecting our girl children that we forget that our boy children are exploited at a higher rate, but they do not disclose. And that is a very big barrier for us in identifying and helping these boys, because they do not necessarily disclose. Going back to a continuum of sexual abuse, and my previous thought that a rape would be an example of contact abuse. We also find that the sexual exploitation and abuse of children can take place exclusively on the online environment. And this is becoming an absolute nightmare for all of us to deal with. And again, there was a beautifully designed study which we were very privileged to take part in, the Disrupting Harm study. And of course, if people want to email me, I'm happy to send the technical report through. So in the online space, exclusively the online space, this is what is happening for children in terms of online sexual abuse. So that the participants in this study, for this part of the study, there were more than 300 children using the internet who took part in this. 1 in 5 said that they had been asked for sexual information about themselves when they did not want to answer those questions. And almost 1 in 10 children had been threatened or blackmailed online to engage in sexual activities. And I'm sure that you are as horrified as I am. And even though we work in this field, getting these statistics was a shock for us when we realized how pervasive the online sexual abuse of children is in South Africa, indeed worldwide. For once, we haven't cornered the market. So we do find sexual abuse exclusively in the online environment, and then we find contact abuse, which never goes online. But in between, there are different kinds of, I almost want to say, intersections between the online world and the contact world. Sometimes, for instance, a child can be exposed to pornography by another child, desensitized around sex and sexuality, and then contact abuse can take place. So there you have a digital technology that facilitated the offline abuse. But you can also find that contact abuse takes place. This is then recorded or captured and then moves online. And these materials can then be shared ad infinitum. And we all know how difficult it is to get these images taken off. So these are
sorry, can I just interrupt and ask, some people are experiencing very poor sound. If you could perhaps just speak louder or move slightly closer to your laptop to improve the sound.
Certainly. I'm going to do my, now you know why I became a psychologist and not a teacher, because my voice doesn't carry. So just to recap, there's a contact abuse that never goes online, abuse that takes place exclusively in the online environment, and then those different intersections of abuse. And when we get, oh dear, Mark, my colleagues still can't read the Q&A. Sue says that she can read the Q&A. All right, so she's going to interrupt me. And all of these different intersections of sexual abuse. And something that I'm going to touch on just now, which is really, really disconcerting, is that we're finding an absolute avalanche of young people who are filming their own sexual activities and are then making those materials available, either for money or not. But we're going to get to that in a minute. I think something that is really difficult for my generation to wrap our heads around is why on earth is all of this happening at the moment? And a big part of the answer to that question is that children are increasingly living their lives online. As a matter of fact, all of you have gifted us with 90 minutes of your life on an online platform. So as much as children are increasingly living their lives online, their parents are too, their caregivers are too. And because children are living their lives online, they are expressing their sexuality online. But we know through the field of cyber psychology that when you go online, human behavior changes. We're going to unpack that a little bit more. Mark, am I enunciating more clearly now? Are people more happy with the sound?
It's better for me, yes. So I should be better for everybody else.
I'm hoping so. All right, so our adolescents are also forming their own identity and are becoming less influenced by their parents than by the peer group. But who is the peer group? The peer group is no longer your rugby team or your hockey team or your chess team or your youth group at school. Your peer group is now your YouTuber that you follow, your Instagram influencer, your TikToker. And these people are not giving our children healthy messages around sexuality. I'm sure many of our participants today will share stories of children saying, my friend John and I play Roblox together. Oh, where do you know John from? No, he's in China, but he's my friend. We're very close. So children and John, who may be a little boy or who may not be a little boy, is playing a very important part in the forming of the identity of our children. And I wanted to also give you an example, just to illustrate how profound the impact is of the online peer group. In 2019, there was a very influential TikToker, or it might be a YouTuber, who disclosed that he suffered from Tourette's syndrome. So up to that point, he'd been editing his videos so that his viewers would not see the twitches and all of the behaviors associated with the Tourette's, but he thought he wanted to come forward and disclose his diagnosis and to his followers. There's a medical school in Hanover who immediately after the YouTuber or the influencer had made his diagnosis public were completely inundated with patients, children who were self-identifying as suffering from Tourette's. So one tick or one twitch took them to the clinic because they now knew about this diagnosis and didn't think about it critically, but went and then presented themselves for treatment. So that's just one example. And again, that's pre-COVID, and everything has worsened after COVID. So children are leading their lives online and they're expressing themselves online. Over here, I've got just an example. This is a blackboard in my office, and I've changed the details so that the child will not be able to be identified. This child doesn't refer to himself by his given name. He refers to himself by his gaming handle. And many children are doing this. Many children are coming to our offices with their gaming handles printed on their t-shirts. So they're not using their Christian names, they are using their gaming handles, which just shows us how profoundly children's identities are influenced by their gaming habits and by the peer group, who is now a virtual peer group. All right, we know that adolescent behavior changes drastically when children are online. An interesting study was done 3 years ago with participants, and 98% of the adolescents said they would never post a sexually inappropriate selfie. And in that study, a quarter of them had admitted to doing exactly that. And that is definitely an underreporting if we look at the statistics coming out of South Africa. So the vast majority of them have the knowledge. They know this is a bad idea. But there's a disconnect between what they know to be a bad idea and what they then actually go and do, especially if they're getting a lot of likes. Now, in my time, Mark, I don't want to give away our age, but in my time, we knew when I was a child and adolescent, it's a profoundly bad idea to go somewhere, consume alcohol, and get on the back of a motorbike with a young man. Yet, what did we do? Exactly that. Because the adolescent brain is wired to take risks, to challenge authority, and that is the way of differentiating from your parents so that you can then start forming your own identity. But because our young people are leaving home much later than in previous decades and centuries, because many of them are still studying, that period of being at home and challenging your parents is becoming longer and becoming more extended. Just on the issue of a lot of likes, this is a problem that we see very regularly. Children know that privacy settings are there to protect them, but they remove their privacy settings so that they can get as many followers as possible, because their sense of feel good, of satisfaction, of being seen, being acknowledged, is driven by the number of likes that they get. And even adults, I don't know if one of our participants will be able to put something on a Q&A and just tell us, are you motivated by the amount of likes on your Facebook post? Do you have a sense of feel good if a lot of people are responding? I'd love to see if someone is prepared to just let us know if that motivates you as an adult. So again, there's the disconnect between knowing what is safe for you, but being driven by the amount of likes, and then doing what you know to be a profoundly bad idea, and that is taking off your privacy settings. So Mark, this brings us to a project that we did at our organization, and we were very kindly funded by the World Childhood Foundation, where we were realizing, my goodness, harmful sexual behavior in children in South Africa is on the increase. It is becoming an absolute epidemic. Those of us working with this are seeing, goodness, I can't think of the completely disconcerting rise in harmful sexual behaviors, and at the same time, it's completely under the radar of people working with children. The case that you just shared that happened in Goodwood is quite out of the ordinary, because most of the harmful sexual behaviors perpetrated by children are never reported. And if they are reported, they will be reported to peers or to siblings, not to responsible adults. So the National Summit on Harmful Sexual Behaviors, and again, I'm happy to send you the technical report, was our organization trying to find a foothold in trying to tackle this huge issue. And again, it's international. So we brought together over a period of 2 days role players from different sectors. We had the child protection sector, Department of Social Development. We had people from child justice, magistrates. We had people from law enforcement, from education, from the health sector. We had people from nonprofit, journalists. So everybody working in the space of harmful sexual behaviors. We had a 2-day consultation, and we brought out a consensus document which tried to map a way forward of where should we start to tackle this problem. And also for our participants to say, all right, we are in agreement that X, Y, and Z are the things that we have to look at first. And we'll be making this document available to you, because of course funding is a big issue for all of us. So there is a roadmap forward for South Africans, but we need buy-in and especially funding from more organizations to help us to take this this work forward. One of the key things that came out of the consultation is that it's very difficult for people to know what on earth is typical sexual behavior and what are the cutoff points. How do we understand what is typical sexual behavior and what is harmful sexual behavior, which would in actual case then be against the law? And this is one of the areas that has all of the sectors have identified as our next big step. And pioneering work has been done by Simon Hackett. He's a UK citizen. We've been in conversation with him, and he is happy to help us use his model and adapt it for use in South Africa. And we're in conversations around that currently. Before I get into this model, which the participants have identified as the best practice model, I just want to take a moment to speak about the Sexual Offences Act. The Sexual Offences Act is the legislation in South Africa that defines what constitutes sexual offences. And the Sexual Offences Act, interestingly, does not have a minimum age for the perpetrator or the actor. So that means that, strictly speaking, an 8-year-old child can be held criminally liable. But Ashima, just help me with the legislation that speaks to the children. The Child Justice Act. The Child Justice Act has recently been amended, and the age of criminal capacity has now been increased to age 12. So a child under the age of 12 is not deemed to have criminal capacity. The child over 12, the criminal capacity then has to be demonstrated. If the child does not have criminal capacity, if there is, for instance, a cognitive disability or something else, then there's a process that has to kick in over there. But what you can already see is the confusion that between the different pieces of legislation. The Sexual Offences Act mandates the reporting of sexual abuse to SAPS. But the Child Care Act gives you 4 different options of reporting. One of them is to SAPS, one of them is to DSD, one of them is goodness, sorry, I'm falling over my own words, a non-profit organization that has the necessary accreditation to be a designated child protection agency. So you can see that navigating this field is very difficult from a legislative point of view and also from a practical point of view, because in South Africa we don't have a standardized criminal capacity assessment process. Our probation officers who are supposed to be working with these children and helping them often don't have not the treatment, perhaps the treatment as well, but not the training on how to know how to work with these children. Some of them go on a 1 or a 2-day course on a very complicated, very complex issue. Just to take a step back, these are some of the issues that came out in our consultation around harmful sexual behaviours. And all of those aspects need to be addressed as we go forward. But I'd like to just stand still here with a continuum of sexual behaviours in children, because some behaviours are typical. And I know that a slightly inappropriate joke will be okay with you. Little boys' penises are attached to their bodies for a good reason. And that's because it's probably the first plaything that they develop and that they can hold on to. So it's very typical for young children to be touching their own genitals. It's typical for them to make inappropriate toilet humor jokes. When behaviours, sexual behaviours with children are consensual and there's giggles and it's shared decision making, we refer to this as typical sexual behaviours. On the other side of the continuum, if there is victimizing intent, which may include violence, if there is force, coercion to ensure that the victim is complying, if there's no consent, if there is alcohol or some other mind-altering substances included, if there is careful planning and either force or manipulation of the child on the receiving end, this is very clear, harmful sexual behavior. But in between is a grey area that's difficult for us to navigate. So inappropriate sexual behaviors would maybe be single instances of inappropriate sexual behavior. So this might be a child saying to another child, "Can I touch your penis? I want to feel what it feels like." It may be socially acceptable within the peer group. I'm going to stand still around that and naked selfies in a moment. But it's a single instance, probably driven by curiosity. The context may be inappropriate, but it's still generally consensual and reciprocal. It's important for clinicians and for all of us to not overreact to inappropriate sexual behaviors. These can be managed by having conversations with children, by setting appropriate limits, and one will find that these behaviors over a period of time will decrease. I want to come back to the socially, goodness, I've just had a senior moment. I picked up my pencil so that I could point to the, to the sentence that I want to elaborate on, and then realize that you can see the pencil, but you won't see what I'm trying to point to. We are finding that young people believe that naked selfies, or nudes as they call them, are appropriate. I was asked by a young man recently, very sophisticated, lovely child, Marita, at what point in my courtship is it appropriate to send a nude or to ask for a nude? Not is it appropriate, at what point in my relationship or in my courtship with this girl is it appropriate? So, and this is where things become quite difficult to navigate, because as adults we know this is completely inappropriate. But for the children, it is completely appropriate. It's not something they're going to discuss with mom and dad, but everybody's doing this, and it's becoming normalized. And you'll remember we said earlier, children are expressing their sexuality online. So, yes, so that's the one thing that we have to keep in mind. It might be appropriate for the young people, but not for us. Problematic sexual behavior is somewhere between inappropriate and harmful, where the consent is unclear, where there may be a lack of power or influence. For instance, a 13-year-old girl influencing an 11-year-old boy. We know that girls are actors in harmful sexual behavior. This is not a boy thing. This is not a boy thing. As a matter of fact, because boys are neurologically less developed than girls while they're at school, they often fall very hard for manipulation, much more so than the girls who tend to be neurologically a little bit further advanced, and sometimes a little bit more worldly wise. So there are no overt elements of victimization, but this is not socially acceptable, and generally the behavior is repetitive. It repeats, and it doesn't stop once it is being addressed by parents or by caregivers. My colleagues are indicating that there's a question, so I'm just going to try to figure out what I've done here should I say, I'm stuck there. Let's click on Q&A. Just need to put another question. All right, thank you. This is a very interesting question. Would you not consider sexual relationship of an adult to a child harmful, even though the child openly confirms consent to the behavior, but the parents are against it? Thank you for that question. Adult sexual content with a child under the age of 18 is against the law. Children may consent or give consent, in other words, say that it is okay, but that is not regarded as informed consent because the child does not have the neurological ability or the emotional maturity to make an informed decision. They may be wooed by, and we see this a lot, and believe me, the blessed blessee thing is still a thing. It's still an issue. So the child may be wooed by a very attractive 24-year-old hip and happening guy who's going to treat her by her perfume, make her feel good about herself, but her body keeps the score. A colleague of mine, Antoinette Besson, did very interesting neurological research where she worked with young people who were called the blessees, put them on some, machines. I'm sounding very vague now, my most humble apologies, to look at their physiology, what's happening in their bodies, what's happening to their blood pressure, what's happening to their pulse rate, their stress levels, that's the word I'm looking for. And even though these blessees were saying, I'm perfectly okay with this, their bodies were telling a completely different story. The majority of them showed increased and sometimes very increased, highly increased levels of stress. Not around talking about the topic, but about being engaged in these relationships. So not only is it against the law, our young people do not have the capacity to make informed decisions. And we also know that at 18, you are not a young adult. You are an old adolescent because the frontal lobe, the good idea, bad idea of the brain, is only fully switched on at age 24, 25. So in actual fact, one should not be making any big decisions about one's life before the age of 24 or 25. I hope that answers your question. All right. Are participants happy for us to move on to coming to terms with children's use of pornography, or are there other things that you would like for us to address first before we move on? I see that I've already spent 45 minutes talking to you. Can people just give me a thumbs up if they're happy for us to carry on? Awesome, thumbs up happening. Great. And then I'm going to move on to the next part of my presentation. You will be shocked, or you may not be shocked, to know that by the time children enter high school in South Africa, the majority of them have already been exposed to pornography. We know from international epidemiology that, the average age is 12 when children have already been exposed to pornography. My poor son, he doesn't know this, or he might know this. He's 28 years old now. He was first exposed to pornography when he was in grade 5. That was way back when. 28 minus 12, 16 years ago. my own son had been exposed to pornography at school on a smartphone by a friend. Because he's been, I don't know, blessed, cursed with having a very paranoid mother, he knew what pornography was. He disengaged himself. He said to the other children, "Oh, sis, man, this porn." And he came home and told me what had happened. And that was way back when. After COVID, we are finding that this, and we don't yet have the studies to support this, but from our clinical experience, we are finding that almost no children coming to us over the age of 10 have not been exposed. Parents simply do not know this. And yes, this is where I get very worked up. You might see do I look agitated? Do I look okay, Sue? Oh, I must look okay. If I get too agitated, just give me the tone it down, because I see the pornography industry ruining the sexual health, the mental health, and the relational health of our children. Most children who use pornography regularly will not disclose this to their parents. And the pornography industry is alienating children from their own parents, who should have the opportunity to guide their children by creating this kind of secrecy. You can see from, I don't even have to read the stats. While I was having my soapbox moment, you could read them there on my presentation. But just to say, Google Analytics in 2021, the third most searched topic was how to make love. And that is certainly not what an adult is going to Google. Please also remember that children don't have to be able to type or indeed spell to make a Google search. They can pick up their phones and they can go to the Google function and press the button and say, "How do I have sex?" And Google will then give you the answer. So even our preschool children know how to use the voice function. The clients are giggling silently. That must have come out a bit strangely. But anyway, so even our preschool clients can get onto the internet and can stumble into the pornography. So what I've learned over the years is that parents are usually the last people to know when their children have a problem. Children actively hide their tracks. They either delete their search histories or they download search engines which do not keep the history. One of them is DuckDuckGo, which I discovered last year, but it's probably outdated already. If you go onto Google, you can do it now, because all of you can do two things at the same time. Unlike me, I can only do one thing at a time. And you will see that the app can be downloaded and then burns your search history as it goes on. And the little icon on the child's phone is a little rubber duck. So it looks like an innocent thing. And a lot of children and indeed adults use those apps to then get their pornography. The next thing is children minimize their involvement in pornography. No, Auntie Marita, I only watched for a year. No, Auntie Marita, I stopped. It's very seldom that the children will disclose the entirety of their involvement in pornography. If you were to ask me, Marita, how much coffee did you drink in a day? I'll probably say 6 cups, but I'm not being truthful with myself or with you, because it's much more than that, because we minimize our involvement in activities that we know are not good for us. We find that very often parents would scold children, would give them hidings when they find that this behavior is taking place. They would just take the phone for a period of time And then after a month or two, thank you, Chaminade, when I spoke about coffee, my lovely client kindly supplied me with a cup. So we find that the parents, caregivers, teachers, they have the talk, they scold, and then they hope for the best. They really hope that the pornography use is going to stop. If children are over-involved, it will not stop. The triggers that got the child into using the pornography in the first place have to be addressed before that behavior will stop. Sometimes the behavior goes underground. One of my clients had his phone confiscated by his parents and then started using his grandfather's phone to watch pornography because Google's phone doesn't have the protective software on. So the question that we ask our clients is, what pornography have you seen? We no longer ask them, have you seen pornography? We're asking, what pornography have you seen? And you will be absolutely gobsmacked by the answers the children give us. We also launched a campaign in the Western Cape, in one of the, I think it was a Delft, I'm trying to remember. We called the campaign #because you asked, and we invited children to take part anonymously to share with us their sexual abuse experiences. Almost all of the children had had some kind of online negative sexual experience, exploitation, abuse. I'm looking at my colleague to help me with the number. I think it was almost 90%. And we're talking about primary school children. Must I speak louder? Okay. And we're talking about primary school children here. So that was our campaign, because you asked. Right. Why are we? I'm literally sitting on top of my laptop now. Yes. I'm really hoping that you can hear me clearly. Why are we so worried about children's use of pornography? It is highly addictive, and accidental exposure often leads to purposeful search within a very short period of time. If you think of consuming alcohol, the alcohol has to go in your mouth, down your esophagus, into your stomach. It has to be digested, I'm assuming, then has to enter your bloodstream, has to cross the brain-blood barrier, and only then are you feeling the effects of the alcohol that you've consumed. If you're watching pornography, it's going straight into your optic nerve, which takes a shortcut into your brain. So you're feeling that huge dopamine hit and also some of the other neurotransmitter hits within seconds. And it is very, very highly addictive. It has a profound effect on children's mental health. Children are traumatized by what they see. It has an impact on their concentration. And for those of you who are interested in the full-length articles of all of the research that I'm referring to now, are welcome to pop me an email. I'm more than happy to share the information with you. Our first study that showed that pornography use has an influence on children's thinking was published in 2020. Increased impulsiveness, so more doing things more before you think about what the consequences can be. Poor decision making, cannot make decisions or make bad decisions, memory problems, and decreased learning ability. I'm sure you'd agree with me that this is profoundly concerning. There's a question regarding grooming. I am in the wrong place. Oh no, I need to scroll down. what I'm reading is, has there been any study done to look at the influence of neoliberal policies on teenagers and sexual misconduct? The one up. What are the percentages regarding grooming? Okay, very, very interesting. I can only tell you what the Disrupting Harm study has shown, where we tend to find in Black communities that there's more forceful sexual abuse, whereas in Indian and white communities we're finding that there's more grooming happening, more manipulation. We don't know why. Does that? I'm hoping that answers your question, but that does relate specifically to online sexual abuse, not necessarily to. Oh goodness, you've had to look at my nostrils this whole time. Now that I'm seeing myself clearly, I really am sorry. Jennifer, I'm hoping that's answering your question, but please remember that pertains to online sexual abuse, not necessarily to contact sexual abuse. Now here comes the big one, the thing that keeps me awake at night. Pornography has become the main source of sex education for the majority of children. Children learn about sexual acts and practices from the pornography industry. And if it's okay with you, I'm going to spend some time unpacking my concerns around this. Parents, and this also came out very strongly in our harmful sexual behaviours consultation, parents still in the year 2024 do not know how to talk to their children about bodies, the rules of bodies, sex, and sexuality. When I was a child, we were given a little book, Wat Meisies Moet Weet, written by Dr. Jan van Elfen. So at some point in your life, your mom would put the book somewhere and hope that you would read it. Of course, I devoured the book because my curiosity is I think, one of my development areas and one of my challenges in my life. And then the worst thing that you could do, which of course we did, you go to the public library and you get the books on the Italian masters. And then you look at the statue of David, and then you get to see what a penis looks like. So in those years, it was okay to speak to your child about sex and sexuality a little bit later. But what is happening now is that if you have not tackled this issue thoroughly with your child by grade R, in other words, when your child starts formal schooling, someone else will do that for you. And that someone else might be a peer, it might be exposure to pornography, it might be children, older children at the bus stop talking about sexual acts. And what then happens is your child is learning about the biology of sex and sexuality. They are no longer learning about the values that we want to impart, because we want to teach our children. Sex is a beautiful thing that the Lord gave us as a way of building intimacy between moms and dads. We also have babies, but it is how we grow close to each other. Wat is hoogliedere in Engels? The book in the Bible, I don't know the Afrikaans word, hoogliedere. I always thought it was, please help me.
The Song of Songs.
The Song of Songs, of course, yes. The Song of Songs, which we've now recently found out was not only written by Solomon, but by some other people as well. Anyway, the Song of Songs teaches us that the human body was created by the Lord within this is of course my personal point of view. I'm more than happy for you to disagree with me. But to tell our children this is part of building an intimacy between mums and dads who are married. And one of the products is that we have babies. And this is a beautiful thing, but the world wants to pervert this for money. And I'm sure I sound like a conspiracy theorist, but you can go and have a look at what the pornography industry is worth in dollars. You will fall off your chair. You don't have to take my word for it. So the moment we do not engage our children in education around bodies, other people will do it, and they will pervert it in the process. So children learn distorted lessons about sex and sexuality. They believe, I'm going to traumatize you now, I'm really sorry, but it's important information for you to have. Anal sex is one of the most Googled sex acts. Now, what happens is that our children believe that anal sex between boys and girls is a normal act. It is hurtful for a little girl to have her anus penetrated, but it's regarded as normal. So now little girls are stretching their anuses so that they can accommodate the sexual demands made of them by boys. And this is all because of this becoming normalized in the pornography industry. What happens is that when you're watching pornography, when children are watching pornography, they are not seeing gentle, loving, consensual touching between two adults. They are seeing forceful, unpleasant, non-consensual sexual acts where women are portrayed as always ready and willing to have sex. You don't even have to ask, you just do it. So children internalize these very toxic messages that they get in pornography, and they don't have a healthy sounding board because mom and dad are not talking about it. So who do you discuss it with? You discuss it with your peers, or you go onto chat groups, and then you go into an echo chamber of people who are telling you that what you're doing is normal. And what you'll see, what I've put here in red on this slide, we've known this forever, but it's now official. Children who use pornography, especially under the age of 12, are more likely to abuse their siblings sexually. And this is something that we're seeing in South Africa. We don't have the resources to deal with this. In the United States, there are dedicated clinics who help families where children are showing harmful sexual behaviors towards their siblings. And most of what we see in practice is driven by pornography. Children are watching it, it's becoming normalized. You have a sister or a brother who's available, and you then, there are things that you've seen that you then try out on your siblings. It's also official that girls who use pornography are twice as likely to be sexually active than girls who do not. Also a very well constructed study that I'm happy to forward to you. And very scarily, violence is a very big part of pornography. I don't remember where I read it, but Pornhub puts out their own statistics. And Pornhub showed that violent sex, BDS, I can never remember all of that. BDS in bonding, in the old days we used to call it sadomasochism, it's not got a name, but bonding. You're tying people up and having sex with them and doing all sorts of really hurtful things. The line between sexuality and violence is becoming blurred for children, and therefore it is okay to grab a girl, because girls always want to have sex, and even if she's protesting, it doesn't matter, because violent sex is okay. While you read the next slide, I wonder if we can maybe just have a check-in with our participants. Do you need a 5-minute body break? Do you need to rush to the kitchen and get an Urbanol after what you've just heard? Or will chamomile tea do it for you? Do people
Marita, I think maybe just in the interest of time, because we have less than half an hour now, we could perhaps start moving towards what you were going to tell us in terms of interventions, helping the victims and the perpetrators to heal, etc. Can we do that? And then we'll leave some time at the end for anyone who has particular questions or comments to make as well.
All right. Thank you for that. I get so carried away with this topic that I can keep you here for the rest of the day. All right, we'll get to that now. I think what's really important for us is to get the message out there to parents and to everybody who's working with children that pornography is an incredibly damaging, very, very damaging thing that is online. A lot of the work that we do is around creating awareness, because we're still getting parents who say boys will be boys. We're still getting schools who are saying that's an issue that parents have to address at school. And I want to say that that is quite possibly the biggest part of the work that we're doing is creating awareness. This is a real problem. This is incredibly damaging. Children will come across pornography in some of the ways that you'll be seeing on the screen at the moment. Children tell other children of the sites that they can go and visit. So these are some of the ways that children can become exposed to pornography. And parents have to know how exposure can happen so that they can try and put situational preventions in place. The last point on this that you'll see is that video games are increasingly being designed to bring sexual content in to entrap children in pornography. And one of the games, I can't remember the name, there is literally a strip club that children can enter when they go into the game and see people taking their clothes off and then see the word strip club. And many of my clients, after they've played that game, will then go and Google strip club. So I think the biggest message that I want to carry out today, parents need to be made aware of the enormity of the problem of pornography. It's not something that is benign. It has an impact on every single part of your child's world, and increasingly children are producing these materials themselves. In the old days, we used to speak about child pornography. We are now speaking about child sexual abuse materials. And if children are recording these, we call it self-generated sexual abuse materials. And an audit was done recently of websites that have CSAM on them, found that 92% of these websites included content that children had created themselves. All right. So, what do we need to know? We need to know that the majority of children will never seek adult help or support. So we have to find these children and help them. And especially in faith-based organizations, we find that the church is sometimes the first place when parents find out what has happened. Generally the first place where people seek support. And it's very important for first responders to know what to do. Of course, what we want to do is to prevent the exposure. The young child, pre-adolescent children, are more accepting of adult beliefs and rules. So before the hormones kick in, children are going to listen carefully to mom and dad, and they are going to take the values that mom and dad impart seriously. It's very important for adults to be comfortable to speak about bodies, the rules of bodies, and sexuality, because if you communicate to your child a sense of discomfort, your child's going to realize, oops, no, this is not something that I can discuss with mom and dad. If adults impart a negative value judgment, children are less likely to come and speak to them. So the idea is just to, let me interrupt myself and say that we've developed a resource which is available on our website, which is a page-by-page resource for parents to help the parent speak to the child about bodies and sexuality. Young children are very interested to know how the baby grows in mummy's stomach. They're very interested to hear about the rules of bodies. The biggest stumbling block is that parents and adults are uncomfortable in speaking to children about bodies and sexuality. So that really is our biggest hurdle, apart from the pornography industry itself. The biggest hurdle for us is for parents to be able to engage children in ongoing conversations. So we don't talk about sex education. We talk about conversations around bodies, the rules of bodies, and sexuality. Sex education is almost a once-off. Let's sit down and talk about the biology. That isn't, it's a useful starting point, but we need to be talking about much more than that. And this guide that you have here will help you to unpack. So, as faith-based organizations, and all of us who are first responders, we have to invest proper time and proper energy in helping parents have these conversations with their children. This is the most protective factor for adults to act as guardians when the children are small. As children grow up, they're going to be forming their own identity. And the cyber world, as we discussed earlier, is going to become more influential than parents and schools. So at this point, blocking software is probably not going to work anymore. And we would say to parents, find accountability software for your children's devices. So your child is allowed to then access more parts of the internet, but the adult gets a report on what the child has been doing and can then have conversations with the child about their online behavior. Something else that I feel very strongly about is that there is no such thing as privacy on a child's phone. We often have parents who say, my child is 15, her phone is private. I can't just take her phone. No, please don't. It's not private. You are not going to allow your child to go into, you're not going to allow your child to go into a bottle store and be surrounded by bottles of alcohol and then say to her, this is your privacy. I am respecting your privacy. Adults need and parents need to know what is happening on their children's phones and on all of their platforms. It's not only what is on Google, it's also what is happening on all of the social media platforms. And parents need to know what's happening there as well. A practical tip would be to involve a caring younger adult in the family, a cousin or someone whom the child looks up to keep an eye out on their Instagram profiles, on their TikTok activity, on their Snapchat, all of everything that the child is using, and just to give the parents a friendly heads up. Listen, I've seen John doing this. I've noticed that Sandy is doing this. So parents need to be on point and need to be involved very early on. Points for thought in protecting children against harmful sexual behavior and pornography is that it has to be all hands on deck. Child protection is everybody's business. Everybody's business. Schools cannot outsource this to parents. Parents cannot outsource this to schools. Just as a point of interest, there's legislation that's been lying. Mike, I think you might find it interesting. I'll send the link through to you. There's legislation hasn't been signed into law now for 2 years, which would compel importers of devices to have just a rudimentary blocking software on the device, which can later on be removed if someone can prove their age, which hasn't been signed into law, and which is a very easy way and low-hanging fruit in terms of protecting our children. That is not happening. So we have to, all sectors of society need to create awareness and keep this on the radar. What you spoke about just now, the 15-year-old boy who committed the harmful sexual behaviors, this is going to be on everybody's radar for a day or two until the next big thing comes along. And then it's going to fall off people's radar. We have to keep the issue of harmful sexual behavior and pornography on the radar of everybody consistently. And our first port of call is getting parents on board ASAP. If there's nothing else that people take home today, please take home, this is what we need. Schools, organizations need cyber policies. Most exposure, most harmful sexual behavior online takes place on smartphones which children take to schools. Schools should be very thoughtful of having cyber policies. There's now legislation that's been passed in Florida and the US, if I remember correctly, that bans smartphones for children under the age of 14 to take to school, and that parents can be held criminally liable if that happens. Hallelujah. That's where we should be moving. Schools should have cyber policies. We should have very careful documentation systems of harmful sexual behaviors. And please, not only contact, but online as well. At some point in the future, I think participants, we are going to be speaking more about online harmful sexual behavior than contact harmful sexual behavior. So we need documentation systems in schools, even in primary schools, where we can keep track and try to identify patterns with certain learners. Who are the learners who tend to act out, and who are the learners who tend to be on the receiving end, who may be special, but there may be certain vulnerabilities there. We know that children will disclose their use of pornography and their harmful sexual behaviors to peers more often than to adults. The Disrupting Harm study showed that only about 1% of boys disclosed online sexual abuse to someone in authority, a social worker, or someone in legal enforcement. The majority of them who had disclosed to peers. So we need to be developing peer-driven programs on cyber security and on good cyber citizenship. We should also know the legislation, and we're happy to send the pieces of legislation through to you that pertain to these issues, as well as reporting procedures. And keep in mind that it is a minefield, and that the pieces of legislation don't necessarily speak to each other. But as with that lovely program, don't panic. You can phone a friend. You have 3 helplines, and one of them is phone a friend. So if you find yourself stuck and it's in a difficult situation, not knowing what to do, please pop us a mail. If we can't help you, we will most certainly ask for one of our colleagues to make contact with you and try to guide you. Colleagues, I've really skipped through some of the parts of the presentation. I really hope that you have heard most of what I've said. I think next time I do an online session like this, I need to get a microphone or something. I'm literally sitting on top of my laptop, so I hope that that's been useful. I'm more than happy to take your questions now.
Thank you very much, Marita. That was really in-depth. A lot of quite disturbing information, certainly for myself, because I'm very ignorant in this field. There was one question that maybe you can go back to. You have spoken of the pornography industry on a few occasions, and you've mentioned, you didn't give us figures, but you said we'd fall off our chairs if we knew how profitable that industry was. And it relates to the question that came in from Mukesh Morar about how this, ties into, or he puts it in terms of the neoliberal policies. But so I guess the bottom line is that this industry is a profit-making concern, and they don't mind if they hurt and harm people, your children, in the process. It took a very long time before people started suing the tobacco industry because of the harm it caused to people in the name of profit. I'm wondering whether there's any concerted attempt anywhere in the world for example, parents suing purveyors of pornography for the harm that they have caused to children, if you're aware of that.
If anything has happened, I don't know about it yet. Just going back to the previous question, sorry, Mark, and then I'm going to just, if time allows, elaborate on your question. But what we're finding is that there are certain platforms, OnlyFans is one of them, where you can post self-generated pornography and you get paid for it. So you have subscribers who pay, for instance, $10 a month. They follow you, you create content daily or weekly or whatever. And obviously the more content you create, the more money you're going to make. You're also finding on some platforms, and even the ones that look fairly innocuous, TikTok, as well as Instagram, I'm aware of, and there are many others, where someone can gift you. There's a little icon on your Instagram page where people can gift you. And if you're posting sexually explicit materials, you will get more gifts. So it is definitely an income generating, directly income generating pursuit for some people. I know of an adult who lost his job, started creating sexual content, he and his wife, and within a few months they were generating 30,000 Rand in income on OnlyFans, direct income paid into their bank accounts. Then, of course, you have a dark part of all of that, where with online money, I can't remember the word, cyber currency, it becomes even more difficult, and it becomes to police all of these things. So yes, it can, for some children, creating content can be survival, let's call it survival sex, because as a child, you're realizing that you can get money from it.
And then there's a question in the Q&A that's just come in there from Anne Baker, who's with our Catholic Institute of Education. And she's asking, and this I'm sure is another big topic, how do you assist children with disability in this field in particular?
That's a very good question, because sometimes children with certain disabilities are more vulnerable to falling prey. Because if you think, for instance, of a child with ADHD, a child with an impulse control problem, that child is more likely to get entrapped because he's going to be more curious and he's going to think about it less. Unfortunately, some of our children who are on the autism spectrum also fall prey to this more easily for reasons that we don't quite understand yet. One of the hypotheses is that it alleviates anxiety for them. So yes, we do help children with disabilities. What we try to do, if the children are watching pornography, is to try and figure out what drives this behavior. Are you bored between 3 and 5 because you're in the bus or the taxi on the way home, and this is how you keep yourself entertained? Have you yourself been sexually abused, and this is an extension of the effects of your own sexual abuse? There are many reasons which drive the pornography use. So we try to figure out what those drivers are and address the drivers rather than just getting stuck on trying to police the behavior of children who are engaging in this. The same thing with harmful sexual behaviors. We cannot punish harmful sexual behaviors out of children. We have to figure out what drives this behavior. And there may be many drivers. For some children, if you're growing up in an environment of extreme poverty and mom and dad have to leave home at 4 o'clock in the morning to get a bus to get to work, you will have less supervision. You are going to have to walk to the taxi rank on your own, which means that you're more vulnerable to being sexually exploited by an adult or by another child. There are many factors that feed into harmful sexual behaviors, and we have to unpack those before we can really offer treatment to a child. And that's what makes this whole field incredibly complicated. There's no one size fits all. It really is a very individualized approach to have to look at what is happening in this child's life, what's happening in this family, what is happening in this community. And yes, it's very challenging for us because there are millions of children in South Africa, and there is a complete scarcity of mental health skills, which is why our organization is also trying to put resources online that people can access for free. And our book on pornography is hopefully going to will be launched in May, which means that people can download the PDF. And it's a first responder guideline, what to do when you see this happening. Also, just to say that there have been congressional hearings in the US on TikTok and a lot of other platforms. A lot of those hearings or attempts to regulate are highly politicized. It's not really about protecting children against the harms of pornography or inappropriate sexual content or other issues. It really is about who's going to buy the platform, who can be forced to buy the platform. That's happened in the past. Highly politicized debates. Pornhub has been banned in 2 states in the US, as far as I know. But there is a tremendous amount of work to still be done in this space because it's about money.
Yeah, so thanks. So there's also an answer in the Q&A around this, that there are moves afoot to sue porn companies in the US, but I can imagine how difficult it is. Just also to respond to Elise Smith, we will, with the permission of Marita, we will circulate this PowerPoint presentation, the slides, to all the audience. But as I said at the beginning, we have recorded this and it will be available as a video, the full presentation, in 10 days to 2 weeks from now, to give us some time over the Easter holidays to get that ready. Could I also perhaps ask Marita, or one of your colleagues there, just to post the Jellybeanz website details in the Q&A, because I'm sure that's probably the easiest way for people to keep in touch with you and to know when your resources are published. You mentioned a booklet that's coming out soon. So if everybody I'm sure you can just Google Jellybeanz, but if you put the website address in there, that'll be helpful.
So Renee shared that on the chat. She's shared some, and I'd also like to please ask all of our participants today, as much as social media can be abused, it can also be used, and we can have good outcomes. So I would really ask, please follow our Instagram page. What we do on Instagram is we share resources. We let you know when things are happening that you might be interested in. We let you know when there's training happening. So it really is a space. And of course, we post inspirational things as well. We've got lovely therapy animals, so we like to treat our followers every now and again with a photograph of one of our therapy animals, or with a good news story. If there's something that's happened in our organization that we can, that can hopefully inspire people, give them hope. So please follow us on our Instagram. I cannot tell you how to do that, but Sean and I will post it for you.
We'll post another link, and also draw your attention to yet another resource that's been posted there, Fight the New Drug, ftnd.org. So well, thank you. It is 11:30 now, we're just past. Let me say that if anyone out there is you haven't had a chance to note down links, or you're having problems accessing the chat box or anything like that, all you have to do is to contact our project coordinator on this project. That's Lois Law, the person who sent you the invitation. And she will undertake, I'm speaking on her behalf, to put you in touch with Marita, with Jellybeanz, or with any other resources that we know of. So you can contact Lois at cplo.org.za or info@cplo.org.za. But the Jellybeanz address is also very, very easy. So I'm going to bring it to an end at that point, and obviously thank very, very profusely and sincerely Marita Rademeyer for such a thorough presentation. I was going to say a wonderful presentation, but it doesn't seem like the right word given the subject matter. It's worrying and it's disturbing, but at the same time, it's comforting to know that there are people like you and organizations like Jellybeanz that are working in this area, and on whom we can call and rely for this kind of input and to deepen our own understanding. I want to thank also your colleagues who are there assisting you with some of the technical things. I think it worked very well. You might at some stage need to check your microphone on that laptop. It was a little bit weak.
Yes.
But I think at the end of the day, we were able to hear. I want to thank my colleagues as well, Lois, whom I've mentioned, who runs this project. Sitting in an office next door to me is Sue Doherty, our events person, who's also been working in the background to make sure that everything goes smoothly. And then all of you. At one point, we had 105 people in the webinar, which is an excellent number. And as I said at the beginning, I think it reflects the seriousness with which we are taking this societal problem. Finally, on behalf of the Catholic Parliamentary Liaison Office, I'd like to wish all of you that are going to celebrate Easter at the end of this week a very holy and blessed Easter. Those who are fasting during Ramadan, we wish you well during the fast. And I hope that we're going to see you all again in future at one of our other webinars or roundtable discussions. And with that, thank you very much and goodbye.